Welcome to the Tippy Top, the podcast that helps entrepreneurs succeed by sharing best practice and creating alignment with investors. You'll hear from seasoned entrepreneurs, venture capitalists, and industry professionals. The Tippy Top helps you learn vicariously because you simply don't have the time to learn every lesson through the school of hard knocks. Nic Pillow, VC, former entrepreneur and technologist, a warm welcome to you on this final episode of Season 1 of the Tippy Top. We're delighted to have you with us. Thanks again, Nic.
Thanks for having me, Alex.
Absolute pleasure. Now, Nic and I have been working together since about late 2019, and we regularly catch up on interesting developments in the VC ecosystem. We collectively either help finance entrepreneurs, or if we can't, we don our mentoring hats and try help them as much as we possibly can. Now, Nic, you've got a very interesting background and a very good entrepreneurial background prior to VC. Do you want to tell us a bit more about that and your current role within venture capital?
Sure. So I started very much in technology itself. Once upon a time, I did a PhD in computer vision, involved with a robotics research group, which was fascinating, but a little primitive in those days. So I didn't carry on directly with that, but I did then get a job in a startup, nominally as a software developer, but in a small company. You're not just doing one job, you're doing bits of everything. So I was developing software, I was testing it, I was deploying it on site, and I was having to support it as well. And you learn an awful lot about what's really important with technology when you're on support out of hours and someone rings you up at 3 o'clock in the morning from New Zealand saying, we've got 500,000 people here who can't make phone calls. What are you going to do about it? So learned an awful lot from that, but then very much moved over to the business side, worked in a couple more startups. I jointly set up the product management function in one other company. But the thing with startups is they get acquired. So I did my time in big companies as well, where I'd been bought up as part of the package, including quite a few years at Nokia, running a global product management team there. And then decided, no, really, I needed to go back to something smaller again, at which point I co-founded an edtech startup and ran that for about 3 years before joining Blackfinch as one of the ventures investment managers just over a couple of years ago. And Blackfinch is an investment specialist, some £600 million of assets under management, founded by Richard Cook. And a few years ago, he decided he wanted to set up a ventures team as well. And that got off the ground in 2018, made our first investment in April 2019. And that's with an EIS product. And we've subsequently added a VCT as well. And that's what I'm doing now, investing in very promising early stage tech companies.
Fabulous. No, great. I didn't know it was so much, 600 million AUM, pretty impressive. And what's really nice is that you've sat on both sides of the table. So you're going to bring a really balanced perspective for the entrepreneurs out there. So really good. Now, obviously, based on our discussion last week, we've come up with some topics. And today I'm particularly excited about this first one. Do you really want equity funding? And I quite like that. Then number 2, how you measure the value you deliver to your customers. And then number 3, importantly, how do you succeed in a startup and as an entrepreneur? So back to number 1, do you really want equity funding? I don't think enough people ask themselves that question. And Nic's going to share some of the perils associated with equity funding. Now, one of them being departing founders. When your investors ask you to leave, either as CTO, CEO, or whatever role you have. Now, I think a lot of people out there say, it won't happen to me. But the reality is that it does happen. Now, Nic, do you want to tell us a bit more about that?
Yeah, nothing like starting with the toughest consequence of taking funding. But the reality is, when you set up a company, first of all, it's an extension of yourself or yourselves, where you've got a team, and it's really personal. But anyone who takes funding is separating themselves from that company. It becomes something separate in which you have a stake, but other people have a stake as well. And the most extreme consequence of that is, at some point, they might say, actually, it's better off without you. And then you have to decide, well, actually, what do I want from this? If it's really not working out, is that the right thing? Or do I want to try and fight for it? And actually, they're all wrong and horrible and mean. And you don't necessarily have that control as soon as you've taken funding. And I've seen it from my own experience as a founder as well. Not in someone coming to me, but I recognized with my co-founder, actually, we weren't quite working properly as a team. It wasn't that he was a bad founder. It wasn't I hope that I was, but together there was too much tension, trying to go in different directions, too much internal debate about small details, rather than just being able to go on and get on with things. And so I was the one in that case who recognized that we needed to change the team. And because what we were doing was based on his research, I felt it was more appropriate that I left. But the same thing happens from the outside with other investors saying, this isn't working, something's got to change. And it could be a founder who has to go.
And then what do you do with the equity in those types of scenarios?
Yeah, that's always the question. So as a departing founder, there's a negotiation to be had, but you would expect to have less than if you had stayed and put all that continued blood, sweat, and tears into the future growth of the company. But usually there is an agreement where the founder gets to keep something, steps back, and will still then benefit in the future when well, hopefully the company does well. And certainly I got to keep something when I stepped out, probably, if I'm honest, more than I should have done, because you've got to make sure, as then a non-involved, a non-executive shareholder, that there is sufficient equity to incentivize those who are there putting the work in and actually delivering that success.
So it feels like it's not financial risk, it's more that kind of emotional detachment. When you take on other people's money, you're giving up your baby, and I mean, it's going to happen anyway. You're going to sell the business at any stage, or at some stage rather, but it just might be earlier than you had anticipated. And there's probably, it's about the psychological aspect more than financial. Is that right?
That's right. It's very much a psychological thing, but you have to recognize it at that point that you take funding, if you do take funding, because it's not yours anymore.
And I think it's worth saying, with an investor hat on, hopefully the people around the table are doing that to maximize the value of the equity stake that you actually keep. So you actually end up with more at the end because it wasn't working in its current form.
Which is the same argument about taking funding in the first place. You get more cash in, you've got a smaller slice of the overall pie, but the pie is so much bigger that actually your smaller slice of the overall is still bigger than if you'd had the whole of something smaller.
Absolutely, well said. Now, sticking on that, fundraising and dealing with investors, what's that really like?
Yeah, well, speaking as an investor, obviously it's wonderful. I'm sure you'd agree. But I mean, seriously, it depends on your investor and what type of investor they are, and what you're really looking for. But certainly, as soon as you get anywhere near an institutional investor, it just becomes a lot more formal. There is legal paperwork. you have to think about a lot of things that you'd rather never happened. It's a bit like when you're putting a will together. You don't really want to have to think about it. It's not something nice, but you've just got to consider the eventualities if certain things happen. So yes, it's a lot more formal from that point of view. But hopefully it's a pleasant experience as long as you are open and transparent with investors, and they are the same to you. I'd like to think most are. Then it's about coming to an agreement and building a relationship. It's actually a really important stage of the process when you're agreeing an investment, because it's the chance to get to know each other. And most founders will be looking for more than just money from an investor. They want advice, support, connections, all the rest of it. This is really the time to build that relationship, and then be able to draw on all the expertise that the investor has in the future. Similarly, it's the opportunity for the investor to get to know you, and see where you need help. Everyone needs help, to some extent.
And if I press you on that and say, Nic, take off your investor hat, put your entrepreneur hat on, what's it really like dealing with investors?
That's an interesting one. I mean, my own personal experience, it was a little bit disappointing, because I was definitely looking for, a lot of support, and I found, initially a very nice angel who was willing to give me lots of money, and I thought this was fantastic, and he's got all this huge, business experience, and I'm going to, the reality was he had come from a big company background, and he didn't have anything like the experience I'd hoped for. And it was sort of superficially, it was good in being able to go to him and say, we can do this, and we just need some money for this, and look, here's some money, and I can go and do it. But what I needed was someone to tell me, no, that's not right. This is what you've got to do first. Go and sort this out, and then you can have some money, or some more money. And so, that was disappointing. But obviously, I'd like to think, now as part of an institutional investor where we have a team. And by the way, in Blackfinch, we are all ex-founders. We've all founded companies. We have that much more experience to be able to give.
Absolutely. I think that's also important when selecting your investor, either founders or next best ex-operators that have actually run a business and can guide you on that journey. Otherwise, it's something they might have read in a textbook. Great. Moving swiftly on, valuations, a very hotly contested topic, especially on this show. And I think the one thing I want to focus on is we've discussed they can go down, and no one ever believes that, and it doesn't sound like fun. So do you want to just share with the audience why it happens and what that actually looks like?
Yeah. So when you get an investment in, you've agreed a valuation for the company before you take that money, the pre-money valuation. And then you get the investment that comes in, the extra cash, and that gives you, your post-money valuation. And you think, okay, brilliant, the company's worth, this post-money valuation. But it's not. It's worth the pre-money valuation, and then you've got some cash. And what you have to do is convert that cash into the underlying value of the company. And suppose you get a year down the line and you were using a lot of that money to set up a sales team. You were doing all the sales before, but now you've hired this dedicated sales team, and actually it didn't work out. And we see this sometimes. It's one of the things that happens. There are other things that go wrong as well, but we see this, and the revenue is basically flatlined over the year because you've taken all your effort off selling and trying to build up this sales team. They haven't delivered. You've had to fire them in the end. You've realized what's gone wrong. You think you know how to fix it, but you've got the same revenue that you had before. Now, you're a year further along. What's your valuation at that point? Well, if you take a simplistic view, you'd say, well, it's the same revenue, so it should be the same valuation. But you haven't converted the cash from before into value now. So you were talking about the pre-money valuation before, and that means your share price has come down because you've got more shares.
Yeah.
Now, but it might be worse than that, because your valuation was actually based on not just your revenue, but your growth rate, which has now gone flat. And I mean, all sorts of other things, but general investor confidence in your ability to deliver, which you haven't done. Now, there's a good story there. You know what happened, what went wrong, but your valuation isn't the post money of the previous one, your previous round. So it might have come down. Problem is, nobody likes valuations to come down because that doesn't look so good in the future. But the more you go on and say, well, and investors are as guilty of this as founders, more you say, oh, well, yeah, but it would look bad. So we're going to make it the post money of the last round. So it'll be flat. You're starting to build up, trouble, because you've got an inflated valuation. It could be even worse in a year's time if things still haven't quite got going. And I think it would be much better actually if people recognized, and then you can attract the investors, because what happens, you might not attract any investment and the whole thing fails because you've run out of money.
No, well said. And as you say, it might cause problems in the future, but your main problem now is you're running out of money and you need money now. So even at a lower valuation, maybe you should take it, maybe not, I'm not sure. And I love that. I worked that through in one of my TikTok videos and built it up and graphically and showed, because a lot of people say it should go up on the last post money by 10%, 20%. You have the argument and they say, just show it. We want to see we get making a little bit of progress. But as you say, it's based on the pre-money, and you should maybe be taking 10% off that, which is quite eye-watering. And that dilution that you were so afraid of in round one is going to really hurt on this round. So to your point, you need the right advice to deploy that cash and convert it into equity value and then some, not just one-on-one ratio, because then you probably haven't really used that money effectively. Yeah, no, very interesting. Thank you. Now, speaking of value in businesses, one of the ways that comes about is creating value for your customers and having a sticky customer base that doesn't churn. And I think a lot of entrepreneurs know that their customer is important and you need to provide value, and that's important. But one of the reasons that this podcast exists is to align entrepreneurs, investors, but more importantly, align the entrepreneurs with their customers, because that's where the money comes from. That's who gives you the money when times are bad, and that's where you generate the value. Now, how do you want to just talk a bit more about that measuring value for your customers?
Yeah, sure. I mean, most founders are really good at coming up with stats that make their business sound really good in terms of, delivering this many widgets or this many clicks or whatever it might be. And it's like coming up with really big numbers and makes the business sound great. And that is brilliant for marketing. And it's not bad for attracting investor attention as well. But it's not a good way to run the business, because actually what's really going on, what value are you delivering to your customers? And there's a couple of bits to unpick in that. First of all, you've got to know who your customers really are. And once you've established that, what do they care about? It's not what you think they care about. What do they actually care about? And to give an example again from my experience, when I was, had a product which could be used for training, and we had something which, delivered more effective training. In other words, people learnt better, and you could prove that so many weeks or months after the training, they would know more and remember more from the training. And they enjoyed it a lot more as well. And it wasn't just like all the corporate training that goes out there. But the people doing the training weren't the people who were buying. And we'd speak to some HR teams or training departments. And for quite a lot, not always, it depended on the context, but quite a lot, what they were wanting to deliver was compliance-based training. There was a regulatory requirement to deliver certain training, or there was a requirement to deliver training so that no one could sue them afterwards because if something went wrong, it was the employee's fault rather than the company's fault. And what they cared about was being able to prove that someone had been trained, and it was really cheap to deliver that training. They didn't particularly care how long it took the employees or how much they enjoyed it. And they certainly didn't care if it was effective, as long as it was recognized as being training on the subject, and covering the material that was required. So if we come to them with something that, is actually better training that will help these people learn better, they didn't care. So, we could come up with as many stats as we wanted about that, but, it didn't matter. So for them, what was going to be important? What would they want to measure? It's like, how many people have actually been trained? Can we track that? Well, actually, any system can do that. So we didn't have an advantage. And can be done cheaply? Well, yeah, we could do it quite cheaply, but so can everybody else. And so that's, what value can we actually deliver in that case? Not a lot. Obviously, there are other circumstances where we could deliver value, but that's where, who are the customers, and what do they care about? And that takes us then on to how do you actually measure it, which I think, you wanted me to cover as well. And that's, that's another interesting one. You've got to keep it simple, but it's got to be something which is, as directly as possible covering what the customer cares about. And that's always got to be the guiding factor. What does the customer think? How does the customer view it? Because that's how they're going to evaluate you and how they are going to compare that with the price they're paying for your service. In some cases, it's very easy. If you are delivering, sales leads, and they can see, okay, how many of these sales, what new business do they make from the leads that you bring to them? Nice, easily quantified in terms of money. In other cases, it might be, say, time saved. Okay, so you can measure it in hours. But then are you comparing that with not having any solution, or compared to the solution they had before? And again, that's where I come back to, how does the customer view it? Do they view you as saving that time, against what they had before, or, against not having any system in place? And so, there's no one way of doing it, but you need to have that measure. And then when you've got that measure, so you can compare it with the price that you are charging, because that's how customers are going to see it.
Yeah, no, well said. I think those are the two keys, I think, well, for me at least. Maybe you've got more, but savings on time or money, or increases in time or productivity increase, those are the big business drivers out there. Or at least how people make decision makings, providing it's not an emotional purchase. And I loved what you said about the compliance training and the video. Those annoying things saying, if you skip to the end, we'll know. And you're like, but you can still put it on mute. Don't tell anyone I said that. Now,
there's definitely scope for an app out there that will watch training videos for you.
Yeah, exactly. And you probably have like eye tracking software and all sorts of stuff that's going to come out to try and ensure compliance. Now, sticking with the value on customers, and this is something that people don't always focus on, the long-term source of competitive advantage. So people will say we have a competitive advantage, but what about the long-term one? What about when your competitors catch up to you and copy you, because they will copy you? And I must have a quick rant saying that's why VCs don't like signing NDAs, because if it's that easy to copy you, they're not going to invest. So I digress. Long-term source of competitive advantage. Tell us about that. And
well, to be honest, we could do a whole session on sources of long-term competitive advantage. But I mean, I guess in the context of measuring value, once you are measuring your value, as I say, the first thing you can do is compare it with the price that you're charging. Now, let's say, for the sake of argument, it's nice and simple, and you've got a financial measure of value. Then it's very easy to compare and to understand what a customer is willing to pay for. So, well, okay, they're going to gain by what is it, £100, per whatever, and it's going to cost them £30 because that's what I'm charging. And you can see, well, actually the price I'm charging is, less than half of what they're going to get from it. Probably, they're in a much better position for having that. You always want the customer to have the majority of the of the value, and then you're getting your bit. And then you can look at two things to do with that. First of all, have I got a sustainable business at that price level? Because not everybody does. But more importantly, for the competitive advantage, you can then say, okay, what's that picture look like for my competitors? How much are they able to charge? Have I got something that allows me to do that more cheaply? Is my method better in that respect, or am I delivering more value for the same price that the customer cares about? And you can then, it's obviously harder to get the exact figures for competitors, but you can get a view on a pretty sensible judgment on what's going on. And then when you understand the differences, then you can extrapolate forward into the future. Can they just copy what you're doing and then get into exactly the same place you are now? Or is there something that is going to prevent them from doing that? Or is there some advantage you've got that keeps them out? Whether that's intellectual property, a network effect because you've built up that market already. What is it that is going to give you that long-term advantage?
No, well said. And it's about that business understanding and that close alignment with your customers, that you're delivering them £100 of value for £10. And actually on that, I saw a really good pricing video by Y Combinator trying to figure that out and then saying that's how you determine your pricing. It's not just what your competitors are doing or $9.99 because that's a Netflix subscription. Work it out in pounds and pence. No, fabulous. Great. Now,
we're strange pricing there as well, but that's value-based pricing. If you don't understand your value, you can't do value-based pricing.
Yeah, exactly. That's the whole 3 episodes, just pricing alone, right? That dovetails nicely into how to succeed in startups, our topic number 3. So as a former entrepreneur, you mentioned to me before that in order to succeed, startups need to keep experimenting, but most importantly, linked to that, work out when it's not working and then adapt. Talk us through that.
Yeah, so I think it's well accepted now that when you've got something like a website or different marketing channels, that you'll do some A/B testing, work out which ones work best, and you do put small amounts of money in and see what delivers the best results. But what people aren't necessarily so good at is then adopting that same experimental approach with bigger things. And it might be your particular product features or your company strategy overall, whether that's in sales or some other element, the type of customers you're going after. And I think it's really important to remember that basically startups are experiments. I mean, at the biggest scale, going back to our first question, it's is this the team that's going to deliver a successful business? But stepping back from that, you've got to always be experimenting. Say, right, we don't actually know what the answer is. Let's find out what's the quickest, cheapest way we can try something out and see if it is right. We all founders brilliant at coming up with ideas, but the dangerous founders are ones which say, I've come up with this idea, this is the way it's going to be, and go full steam ahead down there, and it's far too long before they realize, or somebody else points out to them that that's not working. And I think it'd be much better if we come up with these brilliant ideas, but then okay, let's test it. How can we do that before we've committed too many resources? Because it might be too late by then.
Yeah, well said. And it comes back to the first point of when you raise the cash, you've got to deploy that effectively and smart. And you probably only have 1, maybe 2 goes of it. And you often see people mobilizing whole tech teams and changing the structure. And off they go 6 months down the lane, put it in a big reverse gear like you're trying to slow down the Titanic from hitting an iceberg, and it doesn't always make it. And actually, last week we had a really interesting chat about pre-prototyping, and talking about if you come up with a new business, set up a landing page, ask customers for money. That's what you should do before you build the MVP. And I thought it makes so much sense. Great.
Yeah, the classic example of that, I think, was Dropbox, wasn't it? Where they, they released it as a video and invited people to sign up for it. It hadn't been created, but so many people signed up. When they went to the investors say, oh, it's okay, if you've got a waiting list that long, then we'll give you the money, and then they could build it.
And it comes down to value as well. Lifetime subscription, 40% off. Customers say that's good value, and they buy it right there and then without even seeing the product.
Yeah.
No, fabulous. Now, A/B testing, you've mentioned that's good for entrepreneurs and also investors. Tell us more about the investor piece.
Yeah, well, so I've explained, we all want, startups to be experimental. But the trouble is, investors, we want to see plans, and we say, right, you're going to, if we give you this money, you're going to deliver these results. And I think as investors, we also need to recognize that there needs to be that experimentation in there, and it's not all, that there has to be resources dedicated to experiments, and we can't want all those experiments to work out. But from the founder point of view, it's about understanding how you deliver results in an experimental situation as well. So it's more like managing a research project than a conventional big company plan, where you've got to say, we need to get these results over here, so we need to run these experiments up here at this stage, work out which things are going to work, allowing for a few missteps, but still be able to deliver the end result that we've promised to our investors over here. And the best founders can do that. And things go wrong, and things have to be fixed, but they still deliver against the plans they promised to investors. Whereas a lot of founders maybe don't have the same level of experience. It's the plan is great if everything runs smoothly and nothing goes wrong, and they haven't had anything failing along the way. And so as investors, we've got to maybe encourage the founders to be a lot more experimental and understand that, and not just say, give us a plan and then deliver on it, but provide that sort of extra support along the way.
Interesting. Yeah. I mean,
maybe you disagree. I'm sure you
not at all. I'm just reminiscing about my days in R&D and watching the write-offs, and there was a lot of money spent, put it that way, and not too many results out the back of it. And that's why I got into this industry, saying I'm sure I can do it slightly better, or at least try and spot things a little bit earlier. And maybe I'm wrong, but anyway.
Well, I remember my research supervisor for my PhD as well, who was very good at getting grants, because he always delivered what he said he was going to deliver. And it was always a case of promising something that was less than he was trying to achieve. So it was like, well, we think we can do this, we ought to be able to do that, but it's safe to be able to promise this much, and then we'll see how much further we've actually managed to get. And so there was always that capability to over deliver, but at least you'd get to that. And he then had a very good track record of delivering against what he promised. And he was a pretty bright guy as well. So the things he came up with were that promised were still genuinely new advancements in the field. But everyone felt very, very happy about it because they were delivered.
That really crystallizes the point, and I think that's the message for entrepreneurs. Truly under promise and over deliver. And what all entrepreneurs do is always invariably over promise, and then as an investor, I always say it makes you look bad and me look bad, because when I go back to my seniors and ask for more money, they say, what happened?
Yes, exactly. But you've still got to be ambitious, and set that long-term vision, and show a sensible level of growth even in the short term, but know you can actually deliver it, even when things go wrong.
Yeah, no hockey sticks unless you have locked that revenue in. And there's a good story that comes to mind. There was an entrepreneur came to me with this beautiful hockey stick, quite racy, and I said, no, tell me about the worst possible scenario. If everything went really, really wrong, give me that case. And he was like, I don't want to do that. I said, show me that case. And then I said, hey, right now, halve that. And he was like, you're mad. And I said, that's the numbers I want to work to in terms of predicting your cash runway, if nothing else. And then he came back to me about 12 months later after not having met that and said, oh, sorry.
Yes.
So there you go. Now, speaking about institutional investors, and it might be slightly dry for some people, but a lot of people want institutional investors, but with that comes a lot of governance. And I know you're the expert in the room on ESG. Do you want to talk us through the most salient elements of it in terms of what founders need to know?
Yeah, so ESG, environmental, social, and governance factors, which is increasingly important for big company investments, and obviously all startups are aspiring to get up to that level. So certainly for an exit, it's just something that would be part of the due diligence at that stage. And even Series A upwards, you need to have a certain amount of formality in what you can prove about your environmental credentials, your social aspects like diversity, employee relations, culture, all those sorts of things, and of course governance in terms of the board structure. So governance, when you take an institutional investor on, is likely to get strengthened anyway. You're going to have probably another director on your board or more, depending on who your investors are. And so that side of things tends to get a bit strengthened anyway. But the environmental and social sides are really important as well these days. A lot of founders really committed to that side of things anyway. But if you're not, you need to be from a financial perspective, because investors increasingly care about it, but also the health of your business. You can't ignore your environmental impact, given what's going on in the world at the moment, because there is going to be more regulation. There are going to be consumer backlashes. Enterprise customers won't want to buy from you if you haven't got the right things in place. And at the very earliest stages of a company, it's really about the intent and the attitudes of founders. But make sure you've got your value statement written down or something. It doesn't need to be detailed, but it's really good to have something. Okay, now these are our values, and you've thought about it, and you know what you're trying to achieve. But as you start to grow, you've got to start to formalize some of the things. At some point, you will need to be monitoring your carbon footprint. You'll need to be recording the diversity of your team, and other metrics around that. Some of it's qualitative. It's not all about KPIs and metrics. And that's where an ESG investor would be able to help you as well in terms of putting some of those policies and information together as you grow, because it doesn't happen overnight. It doesn't need to. So start with the right intent and attitude. Don't let things don't take shortcuts in the short term about your offshore development team, and we don't care about how they're treated. We'll sort that out later. You need to get that right from the beginning, but then you can formalize things as you go on.
Absolutely, yeah, hugely valuable, and I think that's the point. You don't have to have big corporate governance and policies and all that, but you need to build it in right the way through, because if you try to do it later, it's too late. And it's, instead of it being something that's a chore, I think you put it quite well there. Entrepreneurs need to look at it as a value creation exercise in terms of the governance is going to make you more investable. Looking after your employees is going to help with your retention. Looking after the environment, being environmentally focused, is going to unlock climate tech VCs too. So there's a lot to like about it.
Yeah, and just be to be clear, ESG doesn't mean you've got to be an impact business. You don't have to be, solving world poverty or something. It's how you run your business, not what that business is.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, there's a and Lucy Rands came on the show talking about there's impact investing and then there's ESG, and they're not necessarily linked, which you've clarified as well. Thanks very much. Great. I'm going to summarize our 3 topics, and then we'll find out where we can get more of your pearls of wisdom. So coming back to number 1, our scary topic, do you really want equity funding? I think to remember, you are selling your baby at the point you take investment, and be ready to part with it emotionally and psychologically from the outset. Dealing with investors, you may be disappointed, not if you work with Nic or I, but others may be. And make sure you get the right support from your investors, and you reference them before you actually take money from them. And then number 3, on valuations, remember the pre-money valuation could go down, not just the post money. And if you're not familiar with those terms, do a bit of homework, have a look at some of my blogs and vlogs. There's plenty on it. Now, in terms of measuring value you deliver for your customers, Nic gave us some really good pearls of wisdom on find out who's actually paying and what they want. And that could be, children's toys. The parents are paying. What do they want? They probably want to relax. So how are you helping them? In terms of measuring value, the 2 variables we came up with, and there probably are more, is time and money. Those are generally the most important things to people. And then in terms of how that feeds into your long-term source of competitive advantage, understand why you are better than the competition and what calculations your customers are actually doing, and then use that to feed it into your business model and make it more robust, and make sure it has the longevity as well as being properly viable right now. In terms of succeeding in startups, Nic said, remember, all startups are experiments, and I've never heard it put that way, so it's very insightful. And then importantly, in terms of A/B testing and making sure you've got the resources to actually fail a little bit, make sure that you truly under promise and over deliver. Don't do the opposite. Allow yourself to experiment and still achieve what you set out and told your investors you were going to do. And then lastly, on ESG, remember, it starts from the beginning, and it's a huge opportunity, especially in this current market. So thanks again, Nic.
Just going back to the thing about working with investors and potentially getting disappointed with them, remember, it's very much based around relationships. So if you haven't either developed and then maintained the relationship with your investor, don't be surprised if it's not working out from their side either, and it starts to get a bit more difficult. It is a relationship. Use them, go to them for advice and support, and they'll be much more willing to support you as you go on.
And true of any relationship, right? When communication breaks down, the relationship is on a one-way trajectory. How can we find out more about all your wisdom? And if we're interested in a chat with Blackfinch, how do we get in touch?
So it's quite easy with me because I have a fairly unusual name. So there aren't too many pillows around, but I'm Nic Pillow, Nic. Don't put a K on, and you should be able to find me on LinkedIn, on Twitter, and by email as well. Actually, it doesn't help my first name for email. It's n.pillow@blackfinch.com if you want to drop me any emails and investor decks. We are looking at the moment for investments for tax year end. So we're making investments end of March.
Yeah, it's a big opportunity for entrepreneurs. So do get in touch if you're interested.
Thank you for having me on your show, and for everyone else for listening.
No, great. Thanks for coming. Hugely valuable. And we'll speak soon. Thanks again, Nic.
My pleasure.
That's all for this episode. Keep tuning in for more exclusive content on how to succeed as an entrepreneur. Make sure that you follow the Tippy Top on all social channels, including Twitter, TikTok, Facebook, or now Meta, Insta, YouTube, with @the Tippy Top blog. And check out my website, thetippytop.com. And you can also find me, Alexander Lee, on LinkedIn. Until next time, Keep pushing, and I'll see you at the tippy top. Cheers.